And a very good evening to you, and welcome to Politics 101 on a Tuesday evening. I would like to welcome all of you wherever you're joining us from. I'm so grateful to have you on, and today we are going to continue our conversation on the issue of race and class. And today we are going to be turning our attention to Geneva, Switzerland, where they're having the special session, the United Nations Permanent Forum on the Peoples of African Descent, which opened today in Geneva, Switzerland. And we had an address there by Wonage Walron, the Minister of Tourism, Industry and Commerce, representing the government. There are two delegations from Guyana there. There's a delegation from the government led by Minister Walron, and there is a delegation from IPADG, led by its CEO, Miss Olive Sampson, who is no stranger to you. And also on that delegation are Attorney at Law Darren Wade and Attorney at Law Senior Counsel Nigel Hughes. So that's the three-man delegation. Vincent Alexander should have been there, but he hasn't gotten there. I think there was some delay in the visa issue, so he's not there, but he should have been part of that delegation. We will be covering that forum all week. It runs today through Friday, and we are going to have the IPADG people on who are going to be reporting on what took place. Today we are going to be paying our attention to the opening of the forum. And as I said, there was a short address by the Minister Walron, representing the government. Vincent Alexander is here, and we're going to walk through what she said. Of course, you know, the PPP has a problem with the truth, generally, but in particular when it comes to the issue of race and the issue of African Guyanese. And so we are going to dissect our statement that she made today and lay bare what really the truth is. So please share the link and let everybody know that we are on. We are going to be dealing tonight with that permanent forum on the people of African descent by the United Nations in Geneva, Switzerland. Vincent Alexander is here with me to help us through what took place today, and we'll be covering that forum all week. Let's start off because they dealt with the minister dealt with reparations today in our statement. Reparations. So let's start off by listening a little bit on reparations. The mighty talkers, my grandfather Mackley.
My grandfather walked like a mule and stole my estate. The cutlass in and lifting them heavy grapefruit crate. Me grandfather work his life out for all them French Creoles, cutting cane, picking coffee and burning coals. But while me grandfather was perspiring, the wealthy French Creoles were gathering. Now their grandchildren living in luxury and making style on me and me 5 picnics. I want me grandfather back there. You hear what I say? They owe me grandfather back there. Don't call them where I'm born there. I want me grandfather back there. I want him to stand me there. They owe me grandfather back there. The Volatile Guns and Dilemma, O'Brien, Grant and O'Connor, fill their bank books and build their empire from the sweat of me grandfather. Me grandfather worked like a horse. It was blood, sweat, tears, and brute force. No house, no land, no bank book, no pension to leave for his grandchildren. I want me grandfather back there. They owe me grandfather back there. It's when we pull manje. I want him to stand me there. Oh. Me grandfather cut lacho and dance cocoa by Mr. Gibbs and Trisha. Me grandfather had to cut grass, feed and clean the horses and run errands for the wives of his white bosses. And while me granddad outside gardening, the wife inside the white woman kitchen, cooking, washing, starching, bleaching, ironing, and on she had a pin, piece of white linen. I want me grandfather back there. I want him Mr. Cartier. They owe me grandfather back there. I want me grandfather back there. You from west side of place. They owe me grandfather back there. Mr. Bolton, Gina Brigger, Mr. Booth, Hawkins, and Fletcher left their bank books for their son and daughter. Not a cent from the grandfather. The grandfather worked like a horse. It was blood, sweat, tears, and good force. No house, no land, no bank book, no pension to leave for his grandchildren. I want me grandfather back there. They owe me grandfather back there. Si moi pas trouvé l'argent, moi t'ai tué. Used to carry me to Manzanilla to dry copra, focused on the guns, the French planter. Sometimes we would walk from Dutch Road to Tortuga about 12 miles to Pickering for Mr. Adrian the Volatile. When William Gordon founded Gordon Grant, the grandma mixed cement to build that plant and tore dry goods in crockers back by the tons for the Oprahs and Sons and the friend Alstons. I want my grandfather back there. They owe me grandfather back there. All them French Creoles. I want my grandfather back there. They owe me grandfather back there. Alston's working till he get old. Grandpa takes so much hot and cold. In the night, if you hear the old man groan, I try to cry up all the bone. No medicine, no doctor fee. The society card empty. The bury in Lavante Cemetery unceremoniously. I want me grandfather back there. God declare today, they owe me grandfather back there. À présent, c'est les pour moi parler. War declare today. Ngozi must manje. Dedicated to your grandfather and mine, for the beads of perspiration that flowed from their foreheads in our interest, and for Isaac Liverpool, my father, who worked hard beyond the call of familial duty to give me an education. For this, we say thanks.
The mighty chalk dust, Dr. Hollis Liverpool, my grandfather's back pay, my grandfather's back pay. And I would like to welcome all of you here tonight. And if you listen very carefully to chalk dust calypso there, my grandfather's back pay, he's not only indicting those who own the slave plantation, he's indicting the French Creole in post-emancipation Trinidad. Very, very important calypso. Chogda sang that in the 1980s. And we are having the conversation today about the post-emancipation state in Guyana also being responsible for reparations. So we have reparations for the pre-emancipation state, the slave state. And you heard Chogda's talk there about his grandfather, arthritis, taking over his body, his wife working in the kitchen. The consequences of plantation, the health consequences, the educational consequences. The Calypsonian there giving us a broad perspective on reparations. War declare, no bank book, no money to left for his grandchildren. Much more his great-great-great-grandchildren. Good evening and welcome to Politics 101. As you know, we've been talking the talk here for the last week, and we've been making it very clear about our narrative going forward. That we are burying that old, tired narrative. Black people suffering, but other race suffering too. Oh, no. We're burying that narrative. The narrative we are talking about is that poor people of all race are suffering because we have a government that is concerned about the rich and not the poor. So poor people of all races are suffering. But that Black people suffering is a particular suffering that has to be dissected and analyzed on its own. There's a way in which Black suffering intersects with Indian suffering, Amerindian, and Chinese and Portuguese. There's a way in which there is universal poverty in Guyana. But there is Black poverty that is more pronounced and particular. It has its origin in a history that dates back to the Middle Passage, long before our other brothers and sisters were here. Poverty as a thing, it just walk in the system. And then we have the race of today, the suffering of today. Remember what we're working with? We're talking about cost of living in Guyana. Good evening to Minister Minister Winston Jordan, if he's listening, I got your missive from Brother Kidaki, and I'm going to deal with that tomorrow. Tomorrow I'm going to deal with that issue. I'm very glad you made contact with me on the issue of the RAID project, which we talked about last night. And we're going to talk more about it tomorrow. But I was making the point. We have cost of living, high prices in the market. And cost of living really, high cost of living really is low cost of labor. When you see the high prices in the market, this is layman economics we talking here, economics 101. The high prices in the market, we tend to pay attention to the prices in the market. But really the prices in the market, they're high because the price for our labor is low, meaning our wages are low. If our wages raise, then those prices will not be so high. Economics 101. But when the government top up sugar workers with 250,000 and then call in the union and negotiate a top up on the wages, so they get a top up of 250,000, then a top up on the wages because the government meet with the union. On the other hand, no $250,000 for public servants. The government not meeting with their union, so the government can't even top them up. The government give them a top down called 6.5%, because really 6.5% really is not a raise. It's not a top up, it's a top down. Now look who make up the majority of sugar workers, Indo-Guyanese. Who make up the majority of public servants? African Guyanese. So when the sugar worker and the teacher go to the market and they face the high prices, the teacher, those high prices are higher because her wages are lower than the sugar worker wages. The sugar worker, the price is still high, but it's not as high as the teacher, because he got the sugar worker get a $250,000 top up, and then they get a top up on the wage. So the price is high, but it's still not as high for the teachers, who get no $250,000 top up. And on the wages, they get a kick down, a top down. That's the framework we're working with. So you see, when we say black people suffering, but other people suffering, we're telling a wrong tale. People of all races, poor people of all races are suffering. But black people of all classes are suffering in a particular way. You have institutional suffering that comes from what Chagda said: no back pay, no bank book to left for your picnic. And then the suffering that comes from the political economy of today, the economics of today. So we can't talk the two stories in the same breath. You all understand why Marxists like myself got to put black in front, black Marxists. Because we black Marxists cannot avoid the issue of race. Other white Marxists can do that. You know, Karl Marx never analyzed slavery. He talked about the Asiatic mode of production. Making some slight reference to enslavement and colonialism. But he didn't deal with slavery. And he didn't deal with Ali and Jack Dio government. He didn't deal with Guyana. Guyana didn't exist. So we accept Marx's theory as it talks about the class division in society as being fundamental. But we part company with Marx on the issue of race, because race is non-existent in Marxist theory. So we, Black Marxists, have to deal with the phenomenon called race. And like I said, Marx didn't deal with plantation slavery, and Marx didn't deal with the Guyanese plantation of 2024. Good evening and welcome to Politics 101. We're doing it as usual because when we are finished here, we are arming ourselves with the consciousness that's going to make us fight to make Guyana right. Please share the link. Please share the link. Please share the link. I said last night that it is not completely true that the Granger government didn't do anything for Black people as Black people. He gave IPADG a subvention that is being taken away, has been taken away. Was no big money. Is a little freck, a little tap up to do some particular kind of work. It wasn't to go into the pocket of Black people. And then there was the rape project that was housed in Ithaca, Buxton, Triumph, and Moko. I can think of those two programs that were aimed at Black people as Black people. I continue to believe that government erred in not tackling more of the particular structural problems of Black people. I continue to say so, but you got to give Jack his jacket. And I said last night that I think the RAID project was not properly thought through. And I got a response from Minister of Finance during the coalition, Mr. Winston Jordan, pointing to some particulars, and I'm going to deal with that maybe tomorrow. But let's bring Vincent Alexander in so that we can begin to talk about our friend Onij Walron, who is not the Minister of Culture. She's the Minister of Tourism, but they sent her to Geneva at that conference there going on, that forum on the International Decade of the People of African Descent. And she addressed the forum this morning. What we're going to do is that we are going to listen to what Ms. Walron had to say in Geneva, and then Vincent and I are going to...
This simple mix of ingredients is capable of making his members stay hard for longer and up to 10 centimeters bigger. And you know what's better?
We are going to dissect what she said there. So we're getting to that. Give us a little time. Give us a little time as we try and line up the tape here, and we're going to get to Minister Walron. Let's get a minute here. Sometimes YouTube doesn't cooperate as much as we would like them to cooperate. They do all their advertisement and all their story, and we're not into their advertisement thing. Let's see if we have Minister Walron here. We do not have her yet. we are going to get her just now. We're going to get her just now. Just bear with us for a minute. I think we have her here.
Madam Chair, thank you for according me and Guyana the privilege of participating in this high-level segment of the opening ceremony. We are honored to be part of this gathering to collectively address issues relating to improving the safety and quality of life and livelihoods of people of African descent. I'm pleased to extend congratulations to Dr. June Summer, a distinguished daughter of the Caribbean community, and we thank for the assumption of the chair, and we thank Ms. Epsy Campbell Barr of Costa Rica for her stewardship over the forum. Guyana, as a multicultural and multi-ethnic society, is mindful and keen to ensure that our population in its entirety enjoys the best quality of life our country can afford. In that regard, we are mindful of the mandate of this permanent forum as set forth in the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 75 of 2014. Chair, we know that the panels in this session of the forum will address the issues of conditions to sustain development and economic justice, education, overcoming systemic racism and historic harm, and cultural recognition. We also note that the CARICOM has been in the forefront of demanding reparations for the descendants of enslaved Africans. Guyana is fully committed to the CARICOM position, and His Excellency President Irfan Ali is on record of having added his voice to the call of the need for reparations. Consequently, we have established a National Reparations Committee within the framework of a 10-point plan agreed by the Caribbean community, CARICOM. We at Guyana provide financial support to this committee and are proud to have facilitated the presence of its chair at this session. Regarding the call for a second international decade for people of African descent, we take note of the merits in that call and unreservedly support the extension of the decade. Guyana looks forward to contributing to the efforts toward improving the conditions of people of African descent, both by supporting the work of this forum and by continuing to craft and implement programs that will redound to the benefit of Guyanese of African descent. In closing, I look forward to fruitful engagements and healthy dialogue, making for a session that yields tangible progress towards realization of the objectives of the Durban Declaration. I thank you.
Let me bring in Vincent Alexander. Vincent, good evening.
Good evening, good evening, good evening to your viewers.
I think we're getting a little song there, but anyhow, we're working through it. Vincent, give us a background of this forum first, and then tell us a little bit about ITPADG's involvement in the forum, and then we'll get to the minister's remarks.
Thank you very much. I hope I'm being heard better now.
Yes, you're being heard.
Right. Now, the United Nations in 2013 declared that the period 2015 to 2024 would be a decade for the people of African descent. This declaration came out of a period of conversations over a decade, going way back to the Durban Declaration, where it was recognized that people of African descent were still affected by racism, xenophobia, and racial discrimination, among other negatives, and that there was a need for a period when the world at large would seek to address this situation. So the decade commenced in 2015. As a part of the work of the decade, United Nations put in place a group of experts on the issue of people of African descent, as well as the United Nations established a forum, a permanent forum for the people of African descent. And so at the level of United Nations, those experts were working along with the various countries, states, and non-governmental organizations to see what could be done to achieve the goals of the decade. The decade essentially focuses on institutional and legal frameworks which have historically disadvantaged the people of African descent. So really the idea behind the decade is to reform those institutions, reform the laws, so as to put the people of African descent into a better position to realize their potential and to make a contribution to national development. Given the fact that they have been disadvantaged, starting with enslavement, in the context of institutional arrangements and in the context of the laws, it was also understood there will be equitable action, so to bring them up. Because if you just change the institutions and you change the laws, they are lagging behind. And so they need some equitable consideration to bring them to the same level with the others. Then those laws would have the effect as intended. IPADG here in Guyana is a response to the United Nations Declaration. I noticed today, now that this issue is hot again, somebody attempted to say that there's a difference between IPADG and IPADG, one in quote, one outside of quotes, and to suggest that one is a creation of United Nations and one is some incorporated company. Now, it's ridiculous to see the extent to which they're going. Because the fact of the matter is, the United Nations did not establish any body in the specific countries. United Nations declared a decade, IPAD. That's what it's called, International Decade for the People of African Descent. Where you have IPAD-G, it is the African Guyanese community that came together over a year of conversation to form an organization that they then named the National Decade for People of African Descent Assembly Guyana. And the word assembly there meant that here was a coming together. At the inception, there were 17 organizations, and notwithstanding what was even said in today's social media, we have moved from 17 and we are now 78. In fact, when the subvention was stopped, we were 63. We are now 78, so we've continued to grow. IPADG here in Guyana needed a legal status in order to conduct its affairs. And so what we decided to do was to have the organization incorporated as a not-for-profit organization, so that there's absolutely no difference between IPADG and any other thing that there is. IPADG Incorporate is that body of people who came together and for the purpose of legal status registered their organization as a non-for-profit company. And so a part of the propaganda that has been peddled is that we have some shareholder company. It's trash. We are a not-for-profit. There are no shareholders. And the persons who are the quote-unquote directors of that company are the said and same persons who are the elected coordinating council of IPADG. articles of incorporation are the same rules or bylaws that Padaji came up with. So those who attempt to say that there is some cooperation that's separate are mischievous and wicked. Having come into existence, we came up with a strategic plan for our work, and we developed a secretariat that would be the machinery to be used to do the work. We, at the same time, recognized that the United Nations was putting certain things in place, group of experts in the first instance, the Permanent Forum. We then became involved in the work of the group of experts. And so the very first meeting that they held, I think it was in 2019 or 2020, we were present. The government of Guyana, who could be considered a state party, showed no interest and did not attend to the first meeting of the group of experts. They then had the first session of the Permanent Forum. And again, Padaji attended the first session of the Permanent Forum. The government did not attend the first session of the Permanent Forum. What they did, however, is they sent some diplomats to what is called a side event that was held parallel to the first session. And obviously those diplomats would have reported what would have pertained. When we came to the second session, which was held in New York, they then sent a delegation. A delegation essentially in defensive mode, because under the declaration, states, governments are expected to have a program of activities for the realization of the goals. The government of Guyana did not have and does not have a program that they can point to and say, this program is for the decade. I challenge them to show that there is any such program that they have. So they had nothing to report as they're supposed to do. But they went to the second session in defensive mode, having realized that Padaji was active with the experts and active at the first session. And so we are now at the third session. What I'd like to observe about the representation at the first meeting that they attended, which was the second session, they sent Minister Waldron. The minister in Guyana who is responsible for activities under the decade is the Minister of Culture, Youth and Sports. They did not send him. They sent Waldron. I don't know if it has to do with the fact that he is an Indo-Guyanese, but that's his area of responsibility, as opposed to Waldron being an Afro-Guyanese. But having sent her, they also sent some people from the Ethnic Relations Commission. They sent the chairperson, who's an Indo-Guyanese, and they sent one, Ras Kafra, who purportedly represents the African community on the Ethnic Relations Commission. What I have to say about those two persons is this. Ras Kafra, for all intents and purposes, is a dissident in relation to Padaji. And I notice his letter of dissent of 2022 was published again today by somebody. His letter of dissent of 2022, in which he claimed that 80% of our membership had problems with us. But as I said earlier, our membership has grown from 68, when he said they had problems. We now have a membership of 78. And so they sent somebody who, for all intents and purposes, is anti-Padaji. The other person they sent was the chairman of the Ethnic Relations Commission. And whilst that person has an office, I would say that two things about that. One, the role of the Ethnic Relations Commission is more like an arbitrary role. Arbiter. And to send them to represent the government suggests that they have taken up a position on matters which they should be arbitrating on. That apart, it's a decade for the people of African descent. And whilst people of Indian descent may be sympathetic to the decade, they do not wear our shoes and cannot represent the people of African descent from a standpoint of an understanding of our dilemma, because they have not and are not experiencing that dilemma. So the good gentleman, as good as he may be, is in no position or was in no position to really represent African Guyanese interests from a standpoint of knowing and living and understanding. And so we find that in the second delegation they've sent presently, once again, they have taken Dissident Kafra and they've sent him. And now they've sent Mr. Suban. Again, they've sent people from the Ethnic Relations Commission, whose role should be completely different, but another Indo-Guyanese who, no matter how much he may love the people of African descent, he's not of African descent and cannot, from the standpoint of his own experience, represent the interests of the people of African descent. So they have sent him as well. So we have this continuity of sending a delegation, which really does not consist of the people who are concerned with, in Guyana, the issue of Ipadeji. This year's delegation, we've also seen them send in Minister Hamilton. Minister Hamilton, the minister responsible for co-op. Because Minister Hamilton is not in his ministry doing the work with the co-ops to bring them along. And in terms of the people of African descent, the co-ops represent that body that provides them an institutional arrangement that can allow them to be involved in business. And rather than help, he is destroying, but he's the one representing us at this forum. Suffice to say that he also was the one who went to Essequibo, where the Essequibo Co-op Union had their own building, a building which Ipadeji contributed to them being furnished and to it having equipment like computers. He literally invaded the building, chased the people from the co-op out, and made it an outlet of his ministry. But he's the one now supposed to be representing the people of African descent when his behavior contradicts anything about interests of the people of African descent. I remember him when we both appeared in the Freddie Kissoon show saying the problem with the people of African descent is that they have not taken advantage of opportunities, and therefore they have no one to blame for their state. He completely ignores the history of enslavement. He completely ignores what has occurred after emancipation and blames the people of African descent in totality for their state. And in fact, it is interesting to note that this blame which he heaped upon the people of African descent is very much in keeping with the government's response to the United Nations when they asked them to respond to complaints that had been made or a report that had been submitted in relation to the decade and the people of African descent. And in that report, the government had things like this to say. Freed Africans in British Guyana refused wages to work on plantations in response to the harsh conditions and that were meted out to them by the plantation owners and the British colonizers. Bangladesh. The people of African descent never refused wages. They demanded higher wages. It's quite the difference. They demanded higher wages, And we know the issues related to them demanding higher wages and to indentureship. We know the issue related there, but they demanded higher wages. And here we have history repeating itself in terms of the people of African descent, once again, and not only them, demanding higher wages and being refused. And what the people of African descent did was to get involved in the village movement, where they purchased villages and sought to get involved in agriculture. And what did the government have to say about that? The government's argument about that was that we abandoned the jobs, purchased villages, and then weren't smart enough to get involved in commercial activities. We go and plant provision. And so we denied ourselves the opportunity of entrepreneurship in terms of commercial activities by self-sufficiency, by planting provision to feed ourselves in the face of the struggle for greater wages on the estates. So that there's a narrative this government has about the people of African descent, which they've even put in documents to the United Nations to suggest that we are responsible for the state that we're in, and therefore we need no assistance. The environment is ripe, and if we were to behave different, all would be well. The problem has nothing to do with institutional problems. It has nothing to do with the laws. It has nothing to do with the fact that in our villages, we were not given license to trade, and that the indentured Portuguese were given license to trade when we didn't get license to trade. It had nothing to do with the fact that we couldn't demand higher wages because indentured laborers were brought to displace us. No, it had to do with us having a problem in terms of being natural entrepreneurs, being sensible and smart enough to do the right things. And that's a context in which the government is responding to G. Because the response to G is that you have gotten $100 million and you don't know what to do with it. You're giving it as super salaries to staff. If the G is to service the people of African descent, you have to have a staff. And what makes a salary super, I do not know. But you have, if your enterprise is manual, manpower oriented, then the money will go on the staff who have to do the work. And the evidence of the work that we did and are doing is out there. When we hold, for example, what we call a Ujama, an exhibition in Main Street, where we bring together over 100 people of African descent to exhibit their craft, to sell their craft. And we train these people in packaging, in marketing. They don't get cash, but they are equipped with skills that can allow them to operate within the sphere of craft and business, etc. So this tale about us just paying staff and not delivering to the people is a concoction. We have delivered insofar as the staff we paid were paid to go and work with the people. The staff was paid to form a credit union, to go and mobilize people to join the credit union. The staff was paid to go and mobilize the people in Mocha Arcadia so they can go and get training in the GSA to process food stuff. That was the kind of work we were doing. But they're running on us saying that we're spending this money on ourselves. And in the first instance, they sought to say we were spending it on ourselves, the coordinating council. Mm-hmm. They sent an investigative team for the Ministry of Finance. They could find no such evidence. But what is interesting to note is that the action taken by the government corresponded with two moments. It corresponded with the moment where one of our organizations, not in Party G, Coffee 50, was going to hold a forum under the theme Emerging Apartheid. It wasn't Coffee 50, it wasn't Party G's forum. All we did was to facilitate the advertisement. We had built a website. another instance of the money spent. Build a website, have a Facebook page, and allow them to advertise. The second critical moment was that we were preparing to engage the government in advocacy in terms of the institutional matters and the legal matters. We wrote to the government, and it's exactly at that time that Barry Jagdeo launched the attack on the Padiji. They stopped the subvention, and the president who promised it Padiji and promised us on 3 occasions and spoke to me personally and promised me on 3 occasions that we would have these discussions, never facilitated the discussions. And you know what? I raised the question with the president when we had the swearing in for the commissioners for the Constitutional Reform Commission. I said, Mr. President, the watch of your word, you promised to have discussions. You promised when you get back from the United States, from Trinidad, you contact us, we talk. A year has passed, you haven't done it. You know what he said to me? He said, my word on this, the fasting week of Ramadan, I'll speak with you next week. Next week is gone, and I'm still waiting. But Ms. Waldron, in Geneva, I've said to our people, why not let's speak? She said that in Geneva. I don't know if she's looking for a photo up or what the situation might be. So that what we have witnessed is an onslaught against Ipadiji. And the onslaught has a lot to do with the fact that the government's disposition is quite different to Padiji's disposition in the question of the people of African descent. What we are calling for, they're not prepared to do. And so apparently they're prepared to dismantle the body so we can't persist in what we're calling for. Contending that they have given money to our organizations. Well, yes, they did. But you know what? They stopped the subvention in September 2022. You know when they gave these organizations money?
August 23.
In August 2023. For almost 8 months. Mm-hmm. There was no money, and then they come along in August, like Santa Claus, to give these people money. We are in 2024 in the 4th month, not a cent to these people. So this argument about giving our money to organizations, and the fact of the matter is that $100 million over the African Guyanese community is chicken feed. $100 million cannot in any way address the issues to be addressed. $100 million could do what we thought to do, establish a secretariat so that we can then go to the next level to get them to address the issues. So we're not impressed with this contention that they give $100 million and that they give our organizations money. They gave them money in August. They walked with cash, no checks, and gave money to individuals in the names of organizations and told them report by February next year about the completion of the projects. I challenge Minister Waldron, who in today's press release said all these they said they did mega farms to the African people. I challenge her when she gets back home to take the press and show the press the mega farms and all these projects they say that they fund. I challenge them to do that. But even if they have done things, it's a drop, a speck in the ocean in terms of the needs of the people of African descent. The Amerindians have gotten billions in the context of the same kind of a decade arrangement. And you give us 100 million and you pelt us down and you're telling us that we can't go and rent a property that's on the market for rental because of who owns it, you know, and then Jagdeo will go to the other side and say we don't do anything for Black people. That's the kind of conundrum they've sought to place us in. Ipadiji is alive. Ipadiji went to the group of experts. It went to the first forum. It went to the second forum. has a strategic plan. It is presently working on the way forward and will continue to do its work in the face of a government which up to today cannot show you a plan for the people of African descent. And in fact, do not believe there should be such a plan because their position is you need reparations from the British and the Dutch for what happened before emancipation. That is what they talk about. They do not talk about reparative action post-emancipation, given the continuation of things that were detrimental to us after emancipation. And given that the United Nations and the Durban Declaration specifically said that these conditions continue to exist and need to be addressed. Their position is the African brothers were enslaved, they need reparations, and once they get reparations, then Guyana is hunky-dory. They don't need any other assistance because they are on the same level with everyone else, notwithstanding the historical realities. The realities where we had to leave our villages, seek jobs in the public service, and then they say now that we hug in the public service, we hug in the police, we hug in the GDF, and therefore other people should be given an opportunity. But we are there for historical reasons. We are there because that is where we found rescue in the face of an onslaught by the state against our villages and our attempt to be involved in agricultural activities. And even now where we rescued, there's an onslaught against us. Low wages on one hand, and trying to say to rebalance the workforce. So where do they expect us to go? What rights do we have in this nation? And then they go out there and say they're committed to the decade.
Vincent Alexander, chairman of ITPADG here tonight. Sister Leslyn has made a comment here. Wonderful work being done by ITPADG, but the work is not known by the community. And that is something that ITPADG has committed itself to correcting as we go forward. There are limitations. This program, for example, has been open to ITPADG. Tonight, we have, let me put on my eye, at present, we have 1,619 of us live on this program. 1,619 of us live. As I speak, it's gone up to 629 in the last couple of seconds. If each of us share this program, if each of us share this program, then we multiply the number of people who get this information that Mr. Alexander has given us here tonight. There's a challenge in the formal media because this question was asked by a media person at a briefing recently by ITPADG, and ITPADG's response was that the so-called traditional media pays little attention to press releases by ITPADG, and that's the truth. That's the truth. If you're not one of the big political parties, the media generally don't pay attention to you. But as I said, there are how many of us now? There we go. 1,699. It's gone up to 1,700 now of us here. If each of us shares this program, then we multiply the number of people who see in this program. And remember, we are saying we have to have two separate conversations. There are ways in which are moments in which areas in which the two conversations intersect. But they have to be two separate conversations. It is the conversation of the poor and the powerless in Guyana. But the conversation about the Black people in Guyana, Black people, because Black people's problem date back, like I said, to the plantation long before our indentured brothers and sisters came. And then there's a way in which the plantation is manifested itself in another rush for El Dorado. Remember, the Europeans came here looking for El Dorado. And then they implemented slavery to find El Dorado. El Dorado turned out to be sugar. And now they're coming for the real El Dorado now, oil. And wherever there's an El Dorado, you have to have labor. You have to have chattel. And they're trying to turn us into chattel again. Remember what Jack Dio said? Sugar workers produce something. Public servants don't produce nothing. So they deserve slave wages. We are in serious times. I'm talking to all black people. And I don't care how you all differentiate yourself. I'm saying red nigger, black nigger, Douglas nigger, same nigger. Georgetown nigger, country nigger, same nigger. This system of domination that they're implementing it will swallow all of us up. And those of you crawling on your knee, going to lick the PPPs, something, you all will be consumed on your knees. Mark my words. Vincent, we heard the minister, God bless her soul. We heard her there in Geneva, speaking glowingly about reparations. And you started to talk about what, when they say reparations, what they mean. And what we say, when we say reparation, what we mean is two different things we're talking about. But she stands on that international pulpit and she says that her government is committed to reparations, is committed to extending the decade, and so forth. Are those words matched by the reality of our government's actions in Guyana?
Well, first of all, let me repeat. When this government speaks about reparations, they are not responding to the mandate in relation to the decade. Because the decade speaks about institutional and legal frameworks that are extant and need reformation. The government does not speak about that period. The reparations that they talk about are the reparations being sought from the British and the Dutch, and those reparations are related essentially to the pre-emancipation period. So the first point I want to make. If one listens to her speech carefully, she separated out reparations from the other elements. And so she made a unequivocal commitment to reparations. So she made, like the president does, an unequivocal commitment to work with the people of African descent and the CARICOM Commission to get the British and the Dutch to give us reparations. But she made absolutely no commitment for the state of Guyana to put in place a plan to deal with the transformational issues that the decade requires should be dealt with. She said they noted these things. She said they're committed to another decade. But at no point in time did she commit resources or any plan of action in relation. And so in many regards, and in fact, when she talked about the Guyana, she talked about the government is committed to the enhancements of the people of Guyana in its entirety.
Mm-hmm.
The point you were making earlier. Yes, the people of Guyana in their entirety need attention. But the decade has been put aside because separate and apart from all of us needing attention, there are some specific issues that affect people of African descent that have to be attended to. You know, for example, we don't have the level of research being done in Guyana as to why the people of African descent are more affected by certain lifestyle diseases, diabetics and hypertension. And people don't seem to realize that when we talk about addressing the issues, that those are some of the issues to be addressed. Those are some of the issues. If the kind of research is done, then we'll be able to do work with the people of African descent in terms of dietary issues, nutritional issues, that can address the health issue, and that can lend to longevity in terms of their own lives. She hasn't responded to the fact that in the school system, we have called for the people for history to be taught. A history which speaks specifically to the history of all Guyanese and that of the people of African descent in particular, so that we could be recognized for who we are, so that we can ourselves get involved in self-recognition. No work is being done on that, but there is this commitment of the entirety. There may be things that require a specific action for others. We know already that specific action is being taken for the indigenous people. We know that the United Nations had a decade and 2 decades for them. And we have seen what has come out of that. They have a Tushol Council, they have a development fund. Here it is, with no similar kind of action has been undertaken, though the predicament that led to the decades for the Amerindians has also led, the kind of predicament that's also led to a decade for us. But no special attention being given to the people of African descent. And rather than attending to them, there are malicious acts to try to destroy the mechanisms they're putting in place to do things for themselves and to relate to the government, because it is clear that the United Nations in its declaration has called for state action. And if you're going to have institutional change, you're going to have legal framework change, it requires the state. We have listed what we think those changes should be, prepared ourselves, sought to engage the government, and they have so far refused. In other words, they refused to act on the core issues for the decade. But they sent off a team to Geneva to say what they're committed to. And if one listens carefully, one would see that the commitment is to reparations, getting money from the British and the Dutch. And there is no material commitment. It's just a set of fluff about the current decade and an extension of the decade. To say that you've given our organizations money does in no way address institutional issues that have to be addressed and the legal issues that have to be addressed. In addition to the fact that the money given to the organizations compared with the monies you give to the Amerindians who are lesser in number, what the Padaji got is chicken feed. And the amount you give to the Amerindians is a clear indication of the kind of monies, the kind of programs ought to be worked on. Let me make another point. That even as they talk about reparations, there's a sneaking up taking place, trying to tie reparations to the people of African descent with some reparations for indentureship. I do have no problem. I don't think the people of African descent have a problem. But if there is something to be given to the indentures for whatever happened to them, but there is no equivalency between enslavement and indentureship. And enslavement has to be dealt with in its own right for what it was. It was a subhuman state, a free-for-all, where we did not benefit from our own labor. and are owed for the contributions that we made to make Guyana the place it is today. It's completely different from indentureship. In a circumstance where they said they were fooled, now without doubt them they were fooled, but it was a relationship they entered into voluntarily. They came, capitalism exploits, they're exploited. But their exploitation in no way could be equated to making other people chattel, not human, a percentage of a human, but to exploit their labor to build country from which all are now benefiting. So that we also have to look at this problem of this cheap talk about indentureship being equivalent to and being tied to enslavement for the purposes of reparations.
Vincent Alexander, and a very good evening to all of you who've joined us in large numbers tonight. And I like to see this, and I like the comments. Good evening to all of you. Good evening, Sister Leslie, and thanks for that comment. I remember you, Vincent, and I, we sat at the same table at Sister Marshall's wake last year. So I know who you are. I get a little old, but the memory's still intact. And good evening to all of you. Good evening to all of you who have joined us tonight, because as I said, we are talking serious talk because we are moving forward at a critical point in our history. And I want all Guyanese to be in tune and to be conscious, but I want African Guyanese to develop a particular consciousness, because it requires consciousness to take action. And we have to take a particular action to right the wrongs and to straighten the crooked roads and crooked angles in our country so that we all can survive equitably. You hear? Equitable. Equality demands equitability. Equitability. And we're spending this week, we're covering that conference, that forum of the United Nations Decade for the People of African Descent. Vincent, you should have been on the delegation. The delegation, however, is there. Sister Olive, Brother Nigel, and Brother Darren Wade. They're there representing it, Padaji. Are they expected to address the conference?
The way in which the conference is fashioned, today they had the general discussions, and tomorrow and the day after, they will have panels. One has to register to be able to make a presentation. This conference, this forum, believe you me, has attracted over 1,000 non-governmental organizations.
Wow. From
across the globe, in addition to governments. And so there's a lot of competition in terms of getting in the 2 minutes. It's only 2 minutes you're allowed to speak in each of the panels. There's a panel on reparations. There's a panel on education. There's a panel on culture. And there's a panel that deals with sustainable development. So we have, in fact, prepared statements to present to each of those panels. There's no guarantee we will get an opportunity to speak on each because of the number of people who are attempting to speak. I have been advised, however, that we are already assured that on the panel for education, we'll have an opportunity to speak. And on that panel, we'll be making the point that there's a need for an education system that provides for the teaching of Guyanese history, including the contribution of every ethnic group to the growth and development of Guyana. But we've gone beyond that and made a suggestion in relation to what we call the pedagogy of ethnic relations. And we are suggesting the education system should operate in such a manner that the school system reflects the model of what we want our society to be, and that every activity in the school should be a learning activity in the context of what we want Ghana to be. So whether it's managing the school, whether it's the environment of the school, whether it's the clubs in the school, whether it's the actual core curriculum, it should all be fashioned in a way to become a learning experience in relation to the Guyanese personality we would wish to go out into the wider community as we seek to go through the transformation which we are talking about. So that in the school system, we will have mutual recognition across the ethnic groups being inculcated. We'll have a system where it's just and it's fair. And we'll have a system where education would foster entrepreneurship and involvement in development, as much as it fosters respect for all contributions to development, because it is not business alone which contributes to development. Health is critical. If you don't have healthy workers, you can't have production. Education is critical. If you don't have educated workers, you can't have production. So that you have to recognize that production and development really is like a wheel with cogs, and that health and education and other non-material activities are equally important and should not be despised, as tends to be the case here. So our education system, even as we train people, should inculcate that kind of disposition, a disposition which also says that if you are involved in TechVoc, then that's not menial. But TechVoc has a lot to do with development, because if one really wants to build a nation, technical people at the end of the day are the ones who are involved. So you need to refashion the education system to lend respect to each and every person and the role that they could play, inculcate values, to inculcate understanding of governance, and to start to have the kind of society that naturally pushes back on the kind of corruption and bad governance which prevails in Guyana today.
And I'm so glad so many of you have shared the link, and please continue to share it. We are going to be covering the forum throughout this week, and we'll have a member of the ITPADACHI committee reporting to us each afternoon. So tomorrow we'll have one member of the delegation there in Geneva. Excuse me. And so on Thursday and Friday, we will continue. Vincent, any parting thoughts for today?
Well, let me say to the public that this forum is open. So if they were to go onto the UN website TV, they can in fact witness the proceedings. The only difficulty is that Geneva is 6 hours ahead. And so the forum starts at 4 in the morning. If you really want to hear what's going on, it's 4 in the morning, and they go on to the earlier part of our morning. But certainly it's open and you can be a participant. In wrapping up, David, let me say that people need to understand, in the first instance, what the decade is about. The decade has its origin largely in the Durban Declaration, where the people of African descent from across the globe came together and made a case that the ills of slavery, the ills of colonization, the ills of apartheid were affecting disproportionately the people of African descent, and therefore there was need for international action to address that. As a consequence, the UN in 2013 came up with the position that we'll have a decade. This decade is not about culture alone, because that's another thing that is happening. When people talk about the people of African descent, they talk about dance and song and all of that. And I've noticed that is a part of what the government speaks about. It's about the complete development of the people of African descent, including their culture. Because we had a situation in 2013 where there was a year for the people of African descent, and the government sought to fund that, but they did not fund developmental activities. They only wanted to fund cultural activities. And that caused a fracturing of the African Guyanese community, because there were those who went for the cash for cultural activities, and those who said, no, 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 this is not what this year is about. It's more than that. You're having a recurrence of that in some regards, and some people think that this is just about this kind of a handout, rather than addressing the core issues, the core developmental issues, which, if they're going to be sustained, have to be related to how you deal with institutions. Nation building is about institution building. How are we going to deal with ensuring that the backlands of our villages are given sufficient attention to make them backlands which we can farm? They're not presently in that state. And even in the instance where the Granger administration established a project for Mocha Arcadia, Buxton, BV Triumph, and Etika to rehabilitate those backlands, this government came in and brought that project to an end, removed the equipment, and therefore that institutional arrangement. We need to understand when we say institutional arrangement, what we mean. Institutional arrangement, the institution that provided for a project and provided for, when the project is done, for the community to have control over the equipment to continue to maintain the backlands, was brought to them. And you would wish to hear what Minister Hamilton had to say about that, but he's representing us today.
Yes.
In Geneva. We, the people of African descent, have got to be able to make our case. It's only if we make our case, we'll be successful. No one else has our experience. They may be sympathetic, but they're in no position to be empathetic. And many of them are in a position where they want to perpetuate the exploitation that brought us to where we're at. So we have got to come together to make our case about what is due to us, even as we continue to contribute to the growth and development of this country. And that this is not about a problem with any other ethnic. It's about responding to the xenophobia, the racism, the racial discrimination, and other forms of discrimination, and the institutional problems and legal problems that exist that are perpetuating underdevelopment of the people of African descent.
Vincent Alexander, chairman of ITPADG, here tonight discussing Black people business. And as I have been emphasizing these past couple of weeks, we have the nation's business, we have poor people business, and we have Black people business to look after. And sometimes they intersect, at other times they diverge. And they have to diverge as far as it has to do with Black people business, because Black people have had a peculiar experience and continue to have a peculiar experience in our Guyana. Vincent, it's always a pleasure. You bring a wealth of knowledge, perspective, and you contribute to this new consciousness that we are building in our country. It was Carter Woodson who at the turn of the 20th century talked about the new Negro. We are 100 years later, and we are talking about the new consciousness of African people. Vincent, thanks very much for
Thank
contributing.
you very much, and please keep the good work up. It's needed.
Thank you, my brother. Thank you very much. The new Negro of the 20th century, Carter G. Woodson, and we in Guyana are taking off from that. And we're talking about a new Black consciousness that is going to make Guyana a more conscious place, a more civilized place, a more humane space, and ultimately a livable place for all its people who tenant here. Good night. Say hello to Mr. Duncan and Mr. Benchop. And I'll see you all again tomorrow when somebody from Durban, I don't know who it is, whether it's Nigel, Darren, or Sister Olive, but one of them will stop by tomorrow for us to continue this conversation.
If you hear black is beautiful, Santa Claus. Black is beautiful. It's a textile. Lift your head like me. You got to wear